Well, hello and welcome to this week's edition of Big Country Politics. This is our Sunday conversation. I'm Manny Diaz. This week we are joined by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Lieutenant Governor, it's always a pleasure to have you on our program.
Manny, good to be with you in the big country. It is a big state. I know on our bus tour, we did 133 cities in about 17 days. It's a big state in Texas. I've traveled across it many times. I had a really great time on our bus trip. Met so many great people, ate a lot of great food, and learned a lot of things that we're actually now passing legislation on that will impact rural Texas.
Well, just earlier this week, on Monday and Sunday of this week at Roscoe CISD, there was a suicide attempt, and at Throckmorton CISD, a mass casualty threat. There's talks of mental health issues that are always surrounding this type of thing. Senate Bill 11, which has kind of been introduced, Keeping Schools Safe, introduced by Senator Robert Nichols of Jacksonville, provides additional ongoing resources to schools for hardening, including money to purchase school safety equipment and hiring regionally embedded school safety experts. Lieutenant Governor, if you can, touch on the issues of what that Senate bill could do for rural areas like that. And certainly, is there anything that could be done to help people experiencing mental health issues in rural areas like Throckmorton, like Roscoe?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned on my bus tour last fall, because I talked to a lot of county judges and all the counties and the sheriffs and other key community leaders and parents. We did not have and do not have at this date enough mental health care hospitals in rural Texas. So one of our other priority bills focuses on exactly that, carried by Senator Lois Colcourse out of Brenham. We're going to spend unprecedented money, over $2 billion, in building out more mental health care beds. And that includes from the Panhandle, where we're going to build a new hospital in Amarillo, to additional beds, additional hospitals all across the state. And it's very important that rural Texas and all Texans have access to that treatment when needed. And a lot of those beds, by the way, are forensic beds. And what I mean by forensic, these are people who are arrested that sit in our county jails forever because there's no place to go. So a lot of these beds not only are going to be for civilians, but are also going to be for people we arrest and who have mental health issues, because right now our county jails are crowded everywhere. So huge, biggest investment the state's ever made. And that's part of what we're doing with the surplus. Senate Bill 11 by Robert Nichols, as you pointed out, is our security bill for school districts. We're putting, again, an unprecedented amount of money from the surplus into school security, $1.5 billion. We really design it so that each district makes their own decisions. For example, Manny, we have many rural districts that let their teachers carry because they're a long way from police support if something happens. So they carry, that's up to those schools. Some of our urban schools don't want teachers to carry, for example. Other schools want metal detectors, other schools do not. And when I say schools, I'm talking about the community, I'm talking about the school board. So we want to have the funds there to access, and we want the local districts to make these decisions that tailor fit their districts.
We'll kind of keep the car wash going here with the Senate bills here. Senate bills 1396 and 1515. It's set to bring the 10 Commandments and prayer back to our schools. Is introduced by Mays Middleton and Senator Phil King. Has there been pushback on this bill, and when could we see something like this go into effect?
We have the 10 Commandments on the Capitol grounds here. And once we used to have the 10 Commandments everywhere in our country, in many public places. And I was actually surprised that there were some who pushed back on putting the Word of God from the Old and Testament into our schools, and principles in the 10 Commandments from the New Testament as well, that ties the two books together, the first and second book of the Bibles, sections of the Bible. So I'm really surprised. It passed on partisan lines, and I was surprised by that, because God is not a partisan issue. And I think that citizens, whether it's a Democrat district or a Republican district across the state, should be in support. I respect everyone's beliefs and their decisions, but there's been some pushback. We've lost our way in this country on many issues, and you talked about it before. Some of the mental health care issues that are going on and the violence in our schools. We didn't see that decades ago, and so part of that is mental health care. Part of that is keeping our schools secure, and part of that is just getting back to the basics of life and trying to live out the Word of God the best we can as frail human beings that we all are.
Well, Senate Bill 16, banning of critical race theory in Texas universities, the last session, CRT was banned kindergarten through 12th grade here in the state of Texas. Tell us about this decision to go after banning this in Texas universities and what potential legislation would look like.
It's interesting. Last fall, out of nowhere, professors at the University of Texas put out a statement, a notice that they're going to teach critical race theory. And for people who don't know what that is, critical race theory says if you're white, you're a racist, and if you're of color, you're a victim. And I don't want our students, I have 8 grandchildren, I don't want our students in our schools to learn it. That's why we banned it in K through 12. And then when I saw these professors said, we're going to teach it, I spoke up and said, well, wait a minute. We banned it in our public schools. We can ban it in publicly funded universities and colleges. They came back and said, we're not accountable to our Board of Regents or accountable to the legislature. And I thought, who are these people that are that arrogant? They're not accountable. The taxpayers pay their salaries. And so they are accountable. And so I said, if you're going to behave that way, then we'll get rid of tenure. So we've also passed a bill to remove tenure, which is a guaranteed job. Who has a guaranteed job? Manny, you don't have one. I don't have one. No one has a guaranteed job for life. And so tenure, we passed a bill to ban tenure, to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion in the hiring practices at our universities, and to ban CRT. And I hope the Texas House picks up all of those bills, because if someone said, well, if you ban tenure and you ban CRT and DEI, you won't get professors who want to come to our colleges and universities in Texas. My response is, if they hate America, hate Texas, and hate capitalism, I don't really want them here. I believe in academic freedom, but yes, they are responsible ultimately to the taxpayers and to the parents who send their students there, and they're responsible to the Board of Regents and the legislature. So that's where all of this started, and we answered.
Well, coming up after the break, more from Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick on issues surrounding Abilene and the Big Country. You're watching Big Country Politics on KTAB. And welcome back to Big Country Politics here on KTAB. This is our Sunday conversation. This week, we're joined by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Lieutenant Governor, we covered a number of issues in the first segment. Let's talk about protecting children from obscene books in school libraries. This is Senate Bill 13 back in November. Parents demanded that the Abilene Library remove 26 books and reclassify them from the adult section to the young adult, or from the young adult section to the adult section. What would this bill do for libraries like the Abilene Library?
So we'll have a state mandate on these books. And I have to tell you, Manny, and by the way, we've done a great job this morning asking a lot of good questions about a lot of legislation that will help rural Texas and Big Country. But on this issue, in the beginning, we would get examples, and I thought, well, is it as bad as people say? Because look, we have 8,000 campuses. We can't keep track of what's going on in every campus or in the 1,200 school districts or our libraries. And I started seeing these books, and they're worse than I thought. There's one book, let's talk about it. There's one book, Manny, that I don't think I could show you the pages right now on your show. I don't think your general manager of your TV station or owners would let us show them. Yet they're in our libraries. Not every library everywhere, but different books, different titles, selling the same message. And it's really sexualizing our children for the most part. In this particular book that I'm talking about, they actually have chapters in there, how children can get on to porn sites, how the book says pornography is sweet and sugary. And it goes into these drawings of everything that you would find, I think most people would find really offensive. And that's in our schools or our other libraries, community libraries. This is one of the reasons why we're passing the school choice bill, or we passed the school choice bill. Hopefully the House will, because parents don't just want to take their kids out of public schools because maybe it's a failing school, or maybe they have a child with a disability and the school can't help that particular child. But it's what's being taught in our schools. Our parents and grandparents don't want their kids to be taught about changing sex, about sex, starting in early grades in the middle school. And again, can you imagine a book that is telling children how to get on a pornographic website? So it's worse than anyone thinks. So bad I can't show you the book, I don't think, without getting in trouble, even though it's in the library shelves. So that's what our bill's about. And I think the House will join us. They've already passed a bill on libraries as well, and books. So we're going to address this problem because parents don't want it. And for those who
say it should be like their First Amendment right, we've heard that argument around here. What would you say to that?
You can say that all day. You can say, and I know you're not saying that, but the people that say that, no, there's a degree of morality and a responsibility that comes with teaching our children. And a First Amendment right it doesn't give you a right to put a book on the shelves to tell you how to kill people in school. I mean, the First Amendment right covers a broad spectrum of issues. But when it comes to regulating what's in our curriculum and what's in our libraries, we have a right to do that with our children, particularly in elementary and middle school and high school. So we're going to take those actions. Someone wants to sue us, let them take us to court. We're going to clean it up. And by the way, I want to say something about public schools. Most of our schools are really good. Some of the public schools are really great, but we have some schools that don't make the grade. And that's why we have the school choice bill, which over 80% of Republicans support in rural Texas. And hopefully the House will pass that bill, because the end of the day is every parent should have the right to send their child to the school of their choice. And if a child does leave a public school for an education grant to go to private school or a church school, we pay that school for 5 years for that missing student. So when I hear from some education, well, you're taking money out of our system. No, we're not. We're paying you 5 years for a child you don't have to educate anymore. So we're doing everything we can. The governor's traveling around the state, and I'm doing everything I can to pass school choice. We passed it twice. It's failed in the House. Hopefully the third time is the charm.
So keeping, the education theme here, Senate Bill 9 is suggesting teacher pay raises, empowering teacher rights, increasing teacher pay by $2,000 for every teacher. And a teacher in a district with 20,000 students or less, they'll receive an additional $4,000 to help close the salary gap between urban and suburban teachers. How realistic is legislation like this and happening for Texas teachers?
Well, I think it will get done. I passed the biggest pay raise for teachers back in 2019. I say the Senate did, and the House went along at that time. It was about a 5,000 on average across the board. Some got more, some got less in the state. There's some ability at the local school districts to use those dollars how they wish, but it has to go to teachers. So I learned on my bus tour this pay gap of $8,000 to $10,000 between urban and suburban teachers. So everyone across the board is getting a $2,000 raise in Texas, our 360 some thousand teachers. And if you're in rural Texas, you're going to get an extra 4,000 raise on top of that. And then we'll close the rest of that gap. Next session would be my goal. And Manny, I think that will pass. And when you say districts 20,000 or less, to put that in perspective, we have 1,200 school districts, and about 850 to 900 school districts have 20,000 students or less. In fact, in rural Texas, as everybody knows, we have some really small districts, about 400, and some have less than 500 kids, and a few hundred have less than 1,000. So this will cover most teachers, this extra 4,000 in our, I say roughly 235, what we would call rural counties in Texas. And for our retired teachers, they've wanted a COLA, cost of living allowance increase. They've never had one because of the surplus. We have the ability, it's an expensive package for us to do, $4.5 billion. We've never had those kind of dollars before to spend on one item. So we're doing that for our retired teachers. So they'll get a COLA starting next year. And for every teacher who's 75 and over, they get a check for $7,500 because they have some of the smallest pensions because they taught longer ago when the salaries were less.
The other side of the coin there is that where's that money come from, and is it sustainable?
Yes, I don't pass anything out of the Senate that I don't think is sustainable. And you ask a great question there, because people say, what about this surplus? We have a lot of money, but we're limited by the Constitution of how much we spend, number one, which is a good thing, population times inflation. And that's about 12 billion this time around. That's going to leave billions of dollars left. So we have constitutional amendments, which the people will vote on in November of this year, in order to spend additional money outside that constitutional limit. That if the people say, yes, spend the money for this item, this item, this item, then we can spend that money. So there'll be a number of those constitutional amendments to spend on key issues that I think people will support in November. But what I'm very careful of, Manny, is that we don't overspend. We have to sustain what we do. So there's ongoing expenses like teacher pay raises. We're doing pay raises for healthcare workers. We're doing a lot of things that we have to keep doing. Property tax, you have to keep doing it. And then there are other one-time things that we can do. So there's a balance there, and we've crafted a budget that I think is the right balance.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for being our special guest this week. You're always welcome in the program.
Thank you, Manny.
All righty. For Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, I'm Manny Diaz. This has been our Sunday conversation here on Big Country Politics. We'll see you next week.